What is up, gents? Welcome back to the Brewcast. Today we're going to be talking about Rollo Tomassi. Okay? The father, guys. The bearer. Okay? The Moses of the Red Pill movement. Okay? Who brought down the 10 Commandments. Oh no, hang on. The 16 Commandments of Poon isn't his. But anyway, guys. The rational male. That was him, and that is essentially what has become the sort of red pill manosphere Bible. And guys, I want to talk about a video he did recently talking about what is masculinity actually. And guys, this is surprisingly hard to answer, but not for the reasons that I want to be all culturally relativistic and wada no, because I do think that there is such a thing as a yes and a no. There is a yes and a no to that question, and it's most definitely not the sort of shitty answers that the left have been trying to give in terms of, oh no, you're a man if that's what you say you are, and that's what makes masculinity, and masculinity can be anything, and as long as it's not toxic masculinity, and if you're a trans guy, that's a different type of masculinity, and there's so many things to separate now that I don't even know where to start on this topic. But this is important, right? Because whatever you want to define masculinity as is what we're gonna chase or strive towards. Now, how we want to define that, oh geez, there's way too many categories, but I'm going to try and get some separation in, and I hope you guys will forgive me if I forget something. But I'm going to try and make some basic distinctions. So, firstly, we have to distinguish between, are we talking about what would masculinity be? Are we talking what would be good masculinity? Because a lot of the times in these sorts of discussions, it's evolving around what masculinity is sort of defined out as what is a good man like. So, for example, and there's a similarity here between sort of the trad conservative ideas and the modern lefty ideas. Yeah, not that they're the same or that they're of equal value, because obviously as a religious guy myself, I happen to fall on the other side, but the lefties just say that a good masculinity, or what they say is masculinity, but what they really mean is good masculinity, or the right masculinity, is whatever makes you an ally to the feminist movement, to other females, and that sort of thing. And the sort of Christian trad idea is good masculinity is to be a father, to be faithful, to protect and provide for your children, to raise them appropriately, all of these things. But the question, and this is something really interesting that Rollo brought up, is that you wouldn't say, for example, that someone like Genghis Khan wasn't a man and wasn't masculine, right? Genghis Khan is 30% of the population's got his DNA. He was a conqueror. He was an asshole, but he was most definitely a manly, masculine asshole. And so his point really is that you have to sort of try and remove the ethical veil from this question, because the question isn't what is good masculinity, it's just what is masculinity. Because values are things we debate, right? Now I happen to think mine are right, but they're things we debate. But what I think Rollo has done here is to just give a sort of factual, scientific of what is masculinity, but purely from a biological, evolutionary, or factual sort of standpoint. Because, and I don't even think it's necessarily an evolutionary standpoint, because even there's a sort of value or ethic involved. So, if you wanted to take a strictly what would be good or successful masculinity from a pragmatic perspective, an evolutionary perspective, you'd say masculinity is whatever actions as a man let you procreate to the next generation, and then make sure that those kids continue to procreate, right? So that your line is continued. Because we know throughout history, only 40% of men have managed to procreate. So the game for men is reproducing and making sure that those kids go on to reproduce. Right, that's your goal, is keep the genetic line going. right? And so if you wanted to take a purely evolutionary perspective, you'd say good masculinity or successful masculinity is whatever allows you to, do that. And that's just, I mean, there's so many ways we can get bogged down here, guys. But he presented this very interesting video on this channel. Can't remember the channel now, but they do these sort of sit down videos where they have people of opposing sides come and answer questions and debate and whatnot, and it's all very like quite highly edited and sort of politically correct and whatnot. And they had these trans guys come on and debate these men, but the problem is that the men ceded ground immediately by allowing the argument to be about what is good masculinity or the right masculinity versus just what is masculinity. And they gave up the ground almost immediately, but partly probably because they're religious guys, and so it makes sense. But the other reason why they did it is because just masculinity right out of the box is probably a lot harder to define, actually, than what would be good masculinity. Because if you think about it, ascribing a value helps to push it towards some type of goal, and it's easier to pick traits if you have a goal because you can be specific, right? In the same way that if your goal is to get 80% on a specific course or a specific subject or whatnot, that doesn't really help you much. But if you know that you have a test on that date, on that date, and that date, and you have to cover this amount of work, it lets you be much more selective about your time, how to manage it so that you can ensure that goal, right? So it's important to have an orientation, right? And I think ascribing value to the term masculinity makes it actually easier to define. Because otherwise we have to include the Genghis Khans and the Christopher Columbuses and the whatnot, all people who in the modern age we don't like, right? Because obviously the new left have big problems with Chris Columbus because he was a slave owner in an era where every white person was a slave owner. And by the way, just on that, guys, it's the biggest lie to pretend, you weak, spineless sacks of shit, okay, that if you were in that situation, in that era, you wouldn't have been exactly the same, because you would have. That's just how it is. The chances of you in that era where slavery is okay as a white guy deciding, I'm not going to do this, this is wrong, I'm going to campaign for it, it's not going to happen. None of you have the balls. But the point is, to get back to it, we're going to have to acknowledge that these guys are masculine guys. So what then are some key ideas? Because I want to give it as strict a definition as possible, because obviously I'm not willing to give up the ground that as a transgender guy you can have masculinity, because it's not, you're not a biological man, right? And so we might, good place to start, testosterone, right? I mean, but then, and men who are higher in testosterone tend to be more masculine in the way that we think about it, aggressive, dominant, physically imposing, all of these things. But at the same time, if you're a woman and you pump yourself full of masculine levels of testosterone, that doesn't make you a man, or it could make you more masculine, but that's not masculinity, right? So first we have to establish that to have masculinity, it's a question of, do you have to be a man, right? Do you have to have an XY chromosome? And I would say yes. You could have a masculine woman, but that doesn't mean that she's a man. That doesn't mean that she has masculinity, right? This is a very difficult semantic game. But I'm trying to sort of lay out the ideas here, because I agree with Rollo 100%, but I'm trying to sort of reason my way there. So you have to be a man to have masculinity, okay? Which means that we can then you need to be testosterone levels, aggression, dominance. I'm thinking now how exactly we would. So if you have to be a man, have an XY chromosome to have masculinity, whether that be good or bad or whatever, amorally now, then you could use high testosterone, aggression, dominance, competence, all these things. But the hard part of this comes in where if we rid value from it completely, then we have to accept that from a point of purely masculinity, there is no difference between a man who is a Genghis Khan and fucks hundreds of women and a guy who is utterly loyal and monogamous to his wife, even if both of them are equally masculine in their other traits, high testosterone, dominant, hyper successful, all these things, right? And it's hard for us to not draw that moral boundary because we sort of want to say, no, the guy who's faithful and whatnot is more of a man. No, guys, we think that makes him a good man. I agree that that makes him a good man because that's a value thing. But that does not make someone like Genghis less of a man. In fact, you'd say more of a man because he went and conquered and look at what he accomplished and all that. Right? So I actually think I'm going to take the hard stance here. It says that actually what makes you more masculine, if we want to look amorally, has very much to do with what men care about, which is accomplishment, which is dominance and competence. And people want to say dominance and competence aren't exactly the same thing, because you could be very good at something but not be dominant at all. But they're intertwined because generally if you become more competent, your ability to dominate successfully goes up. So dominance and competence. Right? How dominant are you? How hyper successful are you? What are your accomplishments? Are you a conqueror? Whether that's of countries, whether that's at work, whether that's all these things. Are you a conqueror? Are you successful with women? To what extent are you successful with women? That's independent, because if you could marry the hottest chick on the block and people say that's super successful, you could also sleep with lots of young women and dudes will also say that's successful. So we're taking an amoral stance now, guys. So what is masculinity? Well, it's, if I had to give it some baseline, I'd say what defines masculinity is achieving what men and women desire from a man. So let's get this right. And actually we've got a caveat there, because here's the thing. What women desire from a man is actually a man who is envied by other men and by other women. So it's a little interesting there. But what makes you more masculine, what makes a guy more masculine or have that masculinity, is that he is actually achieving what it is that the other men value. Which again, and let's be honest here, they might say, oh, we value being an ally. No, you don't. If you're a feminist and you're a dude, you're not really a man. You need to get yourself checked out. Point is, if we're going to define it as something, what do men value? Dominance, power, accomplishment. Right? Performance. Performance is probably the key word. And so, masculinity is a degree of performance as a man, which then allows you access to women, which then makes you desirable. But the performance is the key. The performance is the key. This is why the Red Pill's whole message about, money, finances, fitness, and all these things to get laid, it's true, because that's essentially the performance, guys. It's like once you perform, you succeed. Or at least once you perform, your options become open. The possibilities arise. And so that's why what I also try to do here is talk about these things. I call them the 4 Fs, right? Fitness, fighting, finance, and getting freaky. But really, it's about, at the end of the day, what masculinity is all about is realizing, guys, that as men, we are expendable and therefore built for performance. We're built to perform a function. And so when you perform that function, the one who becomes the best at performing that function, that's what it's all about. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe to the channel for more videos just like this one. I'll see you guys next time, and cheers.